Hi, and welcome to Series 2 of the Pen to Publish podcast with your hosts, Alexa Whitten, author, typesetter, and independent publisher, and
Alexa Tewksbury, author, editor, and proofreader.
Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of Series 2 of Proofreading Matters. Now, actually, this is part 2 of last week's episode, where we spoke about the different styles of editing that you can do. So we had structural editing and copy and line editing. And today we're going to be talking about proofreading. So proofreading really is the last stage of the book's editing journey. And I always think it's a good idea to do this after the book has been laid out. I'm not actually the expert in this, as we know, Alexa One is. So I'm going to hand you over to Alexa One, who's going to explain in more detail what this stage is.
Proofreading. Okay, so if copy editing is part of the refining process, proofreading is like the ultimate polish. It is the Mr. Sheen of editing, basically. It's the final opportunity to make a book as perfect as it can be with the aim of picking up any remaining errors of spelling, punctuation and grammar, any unintentional errors that may have cropped up in the editing process, any inconsistencies with names, for example, that might have been missed.
Oh, I love the Mr. Sheen of editing. I love that. I really do love that.
If anyone can do it, Mr. Sheen can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are we allowed to do product placement?
I don't know.
Who knows?
Who knows? Anyway.
Mr. Sheen is a fabulous proofreader. Okay. So last week I mentioned that copy editing is also a lot about spelling, punctuation and grammar, but proofreading isn't about doubling up unnecessarily on the copy edit. Even though your book may have been through all the stages we've talked about, I can guarantee there will still be errors that have slipped through. Our human eyes aren't infallible, much as we would like them to be, and even through the proofread, things can be missed. Annoying but true, but that's because we're human. Now, proofreading is generally done after layout stage. So that's to say, after the typesetter has designed and laid out the pages as they will appear in the published book. And because of that, proofreaders aren't just looking at the writing, they're checking that the layout of the book works too.
I have to say that having a second pair of eyes once the book's been laid out is invaluable for me as well. I know, Alexa, you've spotted a couple of things that I've missed. I mean, I obviously have checks in place my end, but having someone look at it from a fresh perspective after the book's been laid out really does help. I think you've caught the odd header mistake or bullets that I've missed, as in there are bits of writing that should be bulleted. And I think that's when we work together, it really comes clear that we're a partnership. And if I spot something that perhaps you've missed or you've spot something that I've missed, it just makes for a polished Mr. Sheen type of book.
Yeah, Mr. Sheen finish. I think that what you've just said really emphasizes why it's so important to have that fresh eye on something. It's that fresh eye that picks things up. So a proofreader checks that headings appear as they should, with capitals in the right places and consistent, that spacing around headings is consistent, that paragraph indents are all in place, end of line word breaks are correct, because, believe it or not, there are specific places where words can be divided, and these need to be adhered to in book design. Now, there's a really good reference book, the New Oxford Spelling Dictionary. I can put a link to it in the show notes, and that will tell you where end of line word breaks need to go. Again, it's a sort of technical thing, so I suppose your proofreader is the one who will be looking out for those things. But it might, help you as well if you know when these word breaks occur, if you're looking at your own document in case something's been missed. A proofreader will check running heads. That's where the book and chapter titles that appear at the tops of the pages are in the right place and that they're correct, and they correspond to the chapter titles listed in the contents page. They'll check that the page numbering is right, and again reflects what it says in the contents. That tables and images are positioned correctly in the text with the right caption. You don't want to end up with a picture of the Queen, for instance, with the caption underneath saying it's the Prime Minister. So all those little details have to be checked. And if captions are in a different font or typeface to the rest of the book, that font or typeface needs to be the same for every caption in the book. Some people will like to include full stops at the end of captions. Some people don't want full stops. So again, all those details have to be looked at to make sure they're the same throughout. Now, all that is aside from proofreading the actual book content. So you'd be amazed how much there is to look out for when proofreading. In fact, proofreaders will often break tasks down and go through books several times looking for different things on each pass, because honestly, it can be impossible to pick up everything in one go. Our brains just can't focus effectively on that many different aspects together.
I mean, I always suggest to my authors that they get the second peace of mind proofread, and that's how I call it, because it really is a peace of mind proofread after the layout. As it's amazing how many of these little things that you've just mentioned can slip through the net. I have a checklist, but even with a checklist, where a lot of these things do get double checked, having that fresh pair of eyes just makes it so much more polished. So I think it really is a critical thing to include in your editing budget.
Yes, never underestimate the value of proofreading or your proofreader. Proofreading may be the final step, but it's a vital one if you want to do the job properly, and a skilled proofreader really can heighten the quality of your publication. And you can never really have too many proofreads either. So if you want, as part of preparing your manuscript to send to your editor, you can self-proofread while your book is still in a Word document format. Now, that doesn't mean you sidestep the need for a professional proofreader later on for all the reasons I've explained, but the cleaner the manuscript is to begin with when you submit it to an editor, the more the line editor can focus on the job of line editing. So I've just got together a list of 10 tips to help you proofread your manuscript efficiently. So number 1, read text out loud. When you hear what you've written, you can often hear what's not right. So for instance, if you've repeated a word in next or sentences, you're more likely to hear that repetition than if you're just looking at the words on the page. I can't proofread in silence. I have to read aloud, which is why I could never work in a room with anyone else. Not even you, Alexa too, I'm afraid. Just no one.
Fair enough.
Then number 2, change the font or size of your text when it comes to proofreading it, because you'll have got so used to looking at it as you typed it. If you change it, then again, it'll help you to see it with fresh eyes, because it's as if you're looking at something new. Number 3 is take your time. I can't emphasize that enough. If you hurry the proofreading process, there's kind of no point, because you will miss things. So read slowly and methodically, and read through more than once if you can. I know if it's a long book, that might not be possible, but if it's for shorter documents, it's definitely worth reading through more than once. And take breaks, because it's hard to concentrate fully for hours at a time, and your eyes will appreciate the rest too. Look out of the window for a bit. Now, number 4, in Word, you may know this already, but on your toolbar at the top of your document, there's a show hide button, and that looks a bit like a musical note. Now, when you click on that button, what it will do, it will highlight all the spaces between words and between paragraphs in your document, and they'll appear as little dots. So if you've inadvertently got a double space in there, or even a triple space, it's very easy just to delete whatever dots you don't want. And there should only be one space between words and only one space between sentences. I think years and years ago, when people used typewriters, there used to be 2 spaces between words, but with word processing, there only should be one space between sentences.
I'm dealing with that at the moment with someone that's used double spaces between periods, and I'm having to get rid of them all. It's so annoying.
Oh, it's so time consuming. Yes. So if you do that before you send your book off, it's so helpful. Then number 5, don't trust spell checkers. I know they're tempting, and obviously they do pick things up, but what they won't do is pick up correctly spelt words that have been used incorrectly or in the wrong place. That's what proofreading does. Number 6 is look out for word repetition. Now, it's very easy to inadvertently use the same word in consecutive sentences, even in the same paragraph. And I don't mean little words like the or in or on, but I mean the bigger noticeable nouns, adjectives or verbs. And for the reader, that can be really jarring. So check carefully as you proofread that you haven't repeated yourself. And if you have, substitute alternative words. And number 7 is linked to number 6, really, because if you do substitute words or phrases, always then check in the paragraph before and the paragraph afterwards that you haven't introduced a mistake or another repetition, because I've done that so many times when editing. I've thought, oh, that would be better there, and I've changed the word, and then 2 sentences later that word crops up and it just reads wrong, so I have to go back and change it again. Then number 8, split up and cut back overlong sentences. That's sort of an editing job, but I think you can still do it at proofreading stage. If you proofread carefully, it should really, shoot out at you that something isn't reading clearly. You want your reader to have a smooth reading experience. You don't want to trip them up or leave them floundering. And number 9 is making changes from the beginning to the end of your book. So say, for instance, you're using IZE spellings on words like realize and emphasize. rather than ISE spellings, make sure you're consistent across all the relevant words. So that's all ISE words or all IZE words. Hyphenation is another example. If a word is hyphenated, have you made sure that you've used the hyphen every time it crops up? So if you used self-esteem, have you hyphenated it all the way through your book, not just the first couple of times? So when you make a change like that, ask yourself if it's a change that you're making because it's a one-off, or if it's something that needs making or checking throughout the whole book. And finally, number 10, if your book is divided into chapters with headings and you've provided a contents list, recheck your chapter headings against the contents to make sure they're the same. If a chapter is called A Day in the Sun, and in the contents you've listed A Day in the Sunshine, your editor or proofreader won't know which chapter title you want. So if you check the contents as part of a proofread, it'll save any unnecessary queries later. Now, all those tips, I'm going to do a kind of summarized version, and they'll be in the show notes at the end. So you'll be able to go back and refer to them if you download those. Now, obviously, as we've said, your proofreader will do all these things and more, and that's what you're paying them for. But the cleaner your manuscript is on submission, the better your editor can focus on the task of editing. And I also think that proofreading your own work, it can help you to be a better writer because it teaches you to be really aware of what you're writing and how you're writing and the detail of it. And I know you do writing coaching, Alexa, too, but do you agree with that? Do you think it helps if you're introduces an awareness into how you're actually writing?
I mean, absolutely. I think the more checks you can do your end, obviously, the better. Like you've said before, it's amazing how you read what you want to read rather than what's actually there. So this is why I'm always dubious about working with clients who want to skip the editing process, because it rarely works out well. These tips are fab. Number 6 is really important. Using the same word repeatedly is a very common error in first-time writers. And as for tip 10, any decent typesetter should check this for you. The way that the contents are generated, certainly in InDesign, they're all automatic. However, if in your final read through, you decide to change one of the headings to a different name, you've got to make sure that obviously the typesetter then updates the content so that the new name is reflected. Now, this isn't quite so prevalent in fiction because a lot of books obviously don't have chapter names. A lot of adult fiction just has the number. But some books that do have chapter names. So you do need to make sure that if you're making any changes after the book's been laid out, that the typesetter then does obviously have those checks in place that they then update the table of contents. I get often in my business books where people have decided to switch around the heading hierarchy and the table of contents has been generated, although usually I do that right at the very end. You've got to make sure that then the changes are then reflected in obviously the main typeset document. So it's always a good idea to just double check and make sure that they know to do that as well. I think that's it, unless you've got anything else to say, have you?
Well, with last week's episode as well, we've taken you right through the different levels and stages of editing, from the big picture work right down to the nitty-gritty proofread. And you might not want to do all those stages, you might not have the budget for all of them, but what I've just outlined is the ideal. I suppose for more experienced authors, they may feel they don't need the developmental edit. They already completely understand structuring and flow and feel confident that they can construct a plot that works. But if that's not you and budget is an issue for this stage, you could ask an editor to give you more of a general appraisal, because that won't be as detailed as a full developmental edit, but it will provide you with a commentary on what sort of work needs to be done, which will guide you on how to improve your manuscript yourself. But I would strongly recommend getting at least a line and copy edit, followed by a proofread. Those steps will make a huge difference to the readability of your book. Now, lastly, I've talked a lot about editors making amendments to your manuscript, but please don't see the editing process as an attack on your book, or worse, on you personally. Editors really do want to help you make your book the best it can be. And it's a collaborative process. As a self-publisher, no one's going to force you to make changes, but an editor will encourage you to see and understand where improvements can be made. And as an editor, and I'm sure this goes for you too, Alexa, as an editor, let me tell you, it's so rewarding and heartwarming when an author comes back and says, "Oh, you've made my book so much better." That's the aim of editing. It's to help make your book even better.
Exactly. Let your book go and don't be precious. I think we've worked with a couple of authors who have been really open to suggestions and understand that we're here to make the book better, not worse. Obviously, it's difficult to let go of your book and not take editings, personally, but you've got to, even the best writers have editors. So don't forget that. Don't forget that. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. There's been a lot of information in this episode. Be one that you go back to and jot down some notes. So next week, it's all about style sheets, which is where your specific book has a list of the main things that the editor needs to make sure is consistent all the way through the book. That's all from us for this week. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please do go and leave feedback. It's always good to hear what you guys think. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.